The room went completely silent when the CEO laughed at the degree hanging on the wall. He looked at the single father standing across the conference table and said, with a smile sharp enough to hurt, that a community college diploma was not exactly the kind of education that belonged in a company building the future. Nobody moved. Nobody defended him. And for a few seconds, the man felt every sacrifice he had made as a father, every night he had studied after putting his son to bed, every dollar he had saved for tuition, collapsing into one humiliating moment. But the CEO did not know what that diploma represented. He did not know that behind it were years of exhaustion, grief, unpaid bills, cold dinners, and a little boy who had once whispered, "Dad, I know you can do it." And most importantly, he had no idea that before the day was over, NASA would call the company and ask for that same man by name. His name was Tavian Brooks, and at 38, he had learned that pride was expensive but perseverance was priceless. He had become a single father when his son, Micah, was only 4 years old. Tavian never talked much about how difficult those first years had been. He simply remembered the practical things: making breakfast while answering work emails, checking homework during dinner, falling asleep at the kitchen table with textbooks open, and waking before sunrise to prepare Micah for school. He worked full-time as a systems technician at a private aerospace engineering company called Meridian Vector, while attending community college at night. His degree had taken him almost 6 years because he could only afford a few classes each semester. He had repaired old laptops instead of buying new ones, studied from borrowed textbooks, and sometimes completed assignments in the parking lot during his lunch break because his apartment was too noisy. When he finally graduated, Micah was sitting in the front row wearing a tiny suit and holding a handmade sign that said, "My dad reached the stars." If you believe people deserve kindness, second chances, and the opportunity to prove themselves, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. Because sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the person who has been quietly preparing for the moment the world finally notices. Tavian had never expected to become important inside Meridian Vector. He was simply grateful to have a stable job. He knew the machines, understood complicated systems, and had a strange ability to notice tiny irregularities that other engineers overlooked. His co-workers often joked that Tavian could hear a malfunction before a computer detected it. But he rarely received credit for his instincts because he lacked the prestigious university background that dominated the engineering department. Most of his colleagues came from famous universities. Tavian came from a community college 3 bus rides from his apartment. He had learned through persistence instead of privilege. Everything changed when Meridian Vector won a major aerospace contract. The project was confidential, but everyone knew it was important. The company was developing a specialized navigation and environmental monitoring system designed for extreme conditions. The pressure became enormous. Engineers worked late into the evening, meetings became tense, and mistakes were no longer treated as mistakes. They were treated as threats to the company's reputation. At the center of the chaos was the company's CEO, Garrick Vale, a brilliant businessman known for his polished suits, expensive watch, and habit of making people feel small without raising his voice. Garrick had built Meridian Vector into a respected aerospace supplier, and he believed intelligence was measured by institutions, titles, and resumes. He respected prestigious degrees. He respected connections. He respected people who reminded him of himself. Tavian reminded him of none of those things. One afternoon, Tavian was called into a conference room after discovering a recurring anomaly in the project's navigation system. He had spent 3 nights studying the data. The problem appeared only under a rare combination of temperature fluctuation, vibration, and electromagnetic interference. Most engineers believed the readings were random noise. Tavian believed they were a warning. He presented his findings carefully. He explained that if the system were ever exposed to those conditions during a critical operation, the navigation calculations could drift enough to create a serious failure. He recommended delaying the next test until the problem was investigated. Garrick leaned back in his chair and asked Tavian where he had earned his degree. When Tavian answered, the CEO smiled. Then came the humiliation. Garrick told him that community college was admirable for someone trying to improve his life, but aerospace engineering was different. He said serious decisions required serious credentials. The room became uncomfortable, but Tavian stayed calm. He tried to explain that the data mattered regardless of where he had studied. Garrick interrupted him and dismissed the concern. Tavian walked out carrying his notebook against his chest. He made it to the stairwell before his eyes filled with tears. Not because Garrick had insulted his education, but because for one painful moment he wondered whether all those nights had been pointless. He thought about Micah asleep on the couch while Tavian studied. He thought about the graduation ceremony. He remembered his son's little sign. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Micah asking if Dad would be home for dinner. Tavian wiped his eyes and typed back that he would. That night, Micah noticed something was wrong. Tavian tried to hide it, but children who have grown up watching a parent struggle become experts at reading silence. Micah asked what happened, and Tavian finally told him that someone had made him feel like his education wasn't good enough. Micah looked at his father for a long moment and said that maybe the man had never seen him work hard enough. That sentence stayed with Tavian. The next morning, he returned to work. He could have walked away. He could have stopped caring. Instead, he opened the data again. For 3 days, Tavian investigated the anomaly independently. He compared thousands of test readings, built his own simulation after hours, and discovered something astonishing. The problem wasn't a simple sensor error. It was a feedback interaction between two components that became unstable under specific environmental conditions. He documented everything and submitted a technical report through the proper internal channel. This time, nobody responded. Then, during a scheduled high-temperature systems test, the exact anomaly appeared. The testing room erupted into alarms. Technicians rushed to shut down the equipment. Engineers stared at the screens. The numbers were moving in ways nobody had predicted. Tavian immediately recognized the pattern. He told them to isolate a specific subsystem. For a few terrifying seconds, nobody listened. Then the lead engineer remembered Tavian's report. They followed his instructions. The system stabilized. The room fell silent again. This time, nobody laughed. The internal investigation began immediately. Senior engineers reviewed Tavian's report and discovered that he had predicted the failure pattern with remarkable accuracy. The problem could have damaged millions of dollars in equipment and potentially jeopardized the company's aerospace contract. Garrick was furious, not at Tavian, but at himself. Still, he did not apologize. Instead, he scheduled another meeting. Tavian entered the conference room expecting another confrontation. Garrick sat at the head of the table, surrounded by senior executives. But before he could speak, the company's communications director rushed in holding a phone. She said there was an urgent call. It was from NASA. The room changed instantly. Tavian assumed it concerned the project. He stepped back, expecting the executives to handle it. But the communications director looked directly at him. NASA was asking for Tavian Brooks. Not Meridian Vector. Not the engineering department. Tavian Brooks. A NASA technical team had reviewed the anomaly data shared during the investigation and wanted to speak with the engineer who had identified the failure pattern before the test confirmed it. Tavian could barely process the words. The CEO slowly stood. For the first time, Garrick Vale looked uncertain. The NASA team wanted Tavian's technical notes, his simulation methodology, and his recommendations for preventing similar failures in future systems. They had already reviewed his community college education and his professional record. None of it mattered to them as much as the quality of his work. The call lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, the room remained silent. Garrick looked at Tavian and finally said the words Tavian had never expected to hear from him. He admitted that he had been wrong. But Tavian didn't celebrate. He simply thought about Micah. That evening, when Tavian came home, his son was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. Tavian told him that NASA had called. Micah froze. Then his face lit up. He ran across the room and hugged his father so hard that Tavian nearly lost his balance. Micah told him that he always knew his dad was smart. Tavian smiled through tears and said he wasn't sure he believed that about himself anymore. Micah pulled back and looked at him. Then he reminded his father about the graduation sign. My dad reached the stars. Tavian laughed softly. He realized something that night. The stars had never been about proving Garrick wrong. They had never been about earning a prestigious title or making people regret underestimating him. The stars were about refusing to stop. Within months, Tavian's career changed completely. NASA invited him to participate in a specialized engineering collaboration, and Meridian Vector offered him a leadership position. But the most important change happened outside his job. Tavian began speaking at community colleges. He told students that talent does not always arrive wearing an expensive suit. Sometimes it arrives tired, carrying groceries, raising children, working night shifts, and studying at a kitchen table after everyone else has gone to sleep. He told them that a delayed dream was not a dead dream. And whenever someone asked him what his greatest achievement was, he never mentioned NASA. He mentioned Micah. Years later, Tavian kept that old graduation sign in a wooden frame above his desk. The letters were uneven. The paper had faded. But he refused to replace it. Because it reminded him of the night he almost believed someone else's opinion about him. And it reminded him that his son had believed first. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who is fighting quietly, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. You never know who might be watching today and wondering whether their dreams are still worth pursuing. And before we end, leave a comment saying, "Keep reaching," if you believe your background does not determine your future. Tavian Brooks never needed a prestigious university to prove that he belonged among the stars. He needed courage, patience, and one more reason to keep going every time life told him he wasn't enough. And perhaps that is the lesson we all need to remember. Sometimes the world will judge the paper hanging on your wall. But eventually, life has a way of asking a much more important question. Not where did you study? Not who believed in you. But what did you do when nobody believed? Tavian kept going. And one ordinary community college graduate became the man NASA asked for by name.